Over the past few decades, coinciding with the rise of the internet, we've seen the public perception of film criticism shift further and further towards the negative. The work being viewed as being out of touch with normal people, highlighted by the divide we often see in critic and audience scores on sites like Rotten Tomatoes, and listicles of X times critics got it wrong. Professional film writers are often viewed as elitists or snobs who only see film in the extremes of high art or utter garbage, predictably choosing Oscar bait over popcorn movies. But is that true? And do we still need traditional film critics with the modern democratization of movie discourse? That's what I want to talk about today. This is the value of film critics. Let's do this. So, film writing has existed as long as we've had film, I assume. I mean, they definitely reported on the train, right? But the point I'm making here, Internet, is there has always been a connection between the art of film and the critics writing about it. This can be a good thing, like how Pauline Kael was a champion for the new Hollywood directors early on, as well as drawing attention to international works like Kurosawa and Godard's, some of the most influential foreign directors on the West. So right there, we see how film critics can impact the industry as a whole, having a hand in shaping cultural understanding and helping introduce major figures to their audience. And back in the day, when you wrote for The New Yorker like Kael did, the audience is a major metropolitan area, and that's how you set trends. Now, the counter-argument to this, I assume, would be that with the internet, we no longer need critics to work as tastemakers. We have access to every movie, show, and piece of short-form content from across the globe. And that is true, but to an extent. While we no longer have gatekeepers in the same way we did before, we now have the difficulty of too much choice. Decision paralysis is real, especially when we have so many platforms to choose from, and I think that is a big part of why so many of us retreat to our comfort media, because at the end of the day, why challenge ourselves with something new when we can relax with what we already know we like? That's why so many people, myself included, have our favorite directors that we go to bat for. Not just because we enjoy their work, but we consistently enjoy it so much that we view their name as a sign of quality. One of my favorites working right now is Denis Villeneuve. Ever heard of him? He's a director who, thanks to him helming colossal hit franchises like Dune, is becoming more and more of a known name to the general audience. But that can't be the only way we can spread the word of directors by waiting for them to make blockbusters. In my example, Villeneuve had already built a strong following prior to even Blade Runner 2049 that had steadily been building since his early works, and especially since crossing over to Hollywood filmmaking with Prisoners. But the market for that kind of growth is getting limited. Because blockbuster budgets are exploding right now, studios are trusting fewer and fewer filmmakers, only working with directors who are proven to have made successes. So if you want to discover new and exciting filmmakers, you can't turn to the tentpole movies. Most of them are going to Sean Levy and the Russos. This means we can't really look at the big films to find new talent, assuming those major movies even align with our tastes to begin with. There's always word of mouth, and while that is better, only gets you so far. Let me explain. While there are signs that we have been shifting away from this, since the pandemic, so many theatrical releases live or die based solely on their first week. This is why the most insufferable film fans you know have become so obsessed with the opening weekend box office. This gives movies less time to grow in theaters, and if they don't hit big, even if really good, limits the director's chance of a second shot. Thinking about the fucking film industry makes me sad. Now, I've primarily been talking about theatrical releases here, but I think it also works for streaming, but worse. Streamers will cancel and sometimes even remove works from their platform entirely if they don't perform as expected right away. This means if you are someone who cares about keeping film as a creative industry alive, and I assume you are if you're still watching this, you probably want to keep your finger on the pulse of what's new and good. Also, if you are still watching this but don't care about all that, why? Seriously, let me know. But most of us don't have the time, energy, or funds to keep up with everything new. So obviously, if you want to see things you have the best chance of liking, then you need to find critics you trust. They get screeners to see these movies in advance and can help you figure out where to invest the time and money you have available. I will talk more about that soon, but first I want to get into the perception of critics. Alright, So there is a write-up by Stephen Ball on the site The Movie Elite from 2018 called Why I Don't Like Movie Critics that really annoys me, in part because it is really hyperbolic and reductive, but also written by someone who is writing reviews on that same site. Has that "the critics are so bad, only trust me" type vibes that I'm always bothered by. But that aside, I want to look at the article a little. Like I said, I think it's a little too hyperbolic, but I do think it touches on what a lot of people feel about film critics at large. Let's take a look at some of these headers. They react in extremes, positing that a critic will only love or hate a film with no nuance or middle ground, saying that a critic will tell you that this film and only this film should ever be watched, and that if they hate it, they act outraged. As if someone walked up to them and suggested they engage in sex with a cheetah. There is some truth to this, but not in the way he's saying. Especially in our modern internet landscape, we are constantly being fed clickbait, and that obviously includes reviews. And while yeah, that can suck, that is not the truth for every review. Even some reviews with clickbait titles are given them by the site they are published on, and they aren't necessarily as open and shut as it may seem. But also, when a review does take a stance as good or bad, it should then make the argument as to why. So that can make the perception be that they only hate it by focusing the review on the negatives or vice versa. For example, earlier this year, writing for IGN, Siddhant Lanka wrote a more positive review on the live-action Snow White film than most other people did. He only spends a short amount of time on things like the upsetting dwarf designs because he was highlighting the positives, mainly Rachel Zegler's performance and how the film compares to other worse live-action Disney remakes. A smart move in my opinion, because everybody has been going after the low-hanging fruit that is the look of the dwarves, so spending too much of your limited word count on that is bad writing when you actually have something else to say. And as a sidebar, the internet went way too hard on him for this review. A lot of people, especially the ones who hate Rachel Zegler for existing, but not exclusively those people, got so mad at Siddhant because he wasn't just part of the hate mob around the movie. This is crazy. I often find myself disagreeing with his reviews, and I'm not the only one, but I do often read them because his writing is so good, and challenging my own views on what I watch helps me process them in ways other than pure praise or hate. And this is so important because so many people, seemingly including Stephen Ball himself, treat film critics as a monolith, all sharing one point of view on the entire art form. And that is, of course, not true. Back to Ball's article, the thing that I get most bothered by is the idea that critics don't think movies should be fun. He puts forth the notion that critics think Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, and The Rock have no place in cinema. All three of those guys mentioned have had their share of both good and bad movies in their careers, and acting like critics hate them for making action movies is just wrong. To look at a modern action franchise, the John Wick films are all very positively reviewed. So maybe these guys he brings up get bad reviews when they make lazy generic actioners. Keanu, the lead of the John Wick movies that I just cited, has had plenty of poorly reviewed stinkers in his career. It happens. Just because you, as a person, might enjoy schlocky action movies does not mean that they are good. You can find joy in the over-the-top, by-the-numbers, tropey works of The Rock's current career, but not enjoying them doesn't make you an elitist. You are just looking for different things in your entertainment. The last point I want to bring up in this article, because I'm not going to cover every paragraph, that would be crazy, is Ball's point of critics being predictable. He complains about Oscar bait films getting good reviews, claiming he can scroll down and guess the number before even reading. I don't love this because there have been plenty of critically panned movies attempting to be prestige pictures, but more importantly, it taps on one of my least favorite things about discussing critics and film criticism in general, which is numbered scores. There is so much online discourse on what is a 5-star movie versus a 2-star movie, what should have been a 9 on 10 versus a 7, when that is the least important part of the review. I've seen critics online say the score is an afterthought, something they put on at the end just because they have to. I've also heard, but cannot find definitive proof of, some sites not even asking critics for scores and just adding one to the bottom of the reviews they think reflect the writing. The number scores are arbitrary, and what I think is a 5-star isn't what you think is a 5-star, isn't what Roger Ebert thinks is a 5-star. Hell, Ebert rated out of 4. So when people get mad he gave something a 3, they kind of assume they were thinking of it out of 5. But there's a big difference. What really matters is the review itself, what the writers in question is saying about the film, and that ties into the last point I really want to make on how to find the right critics for you. Just quickly wanted to say, if you're enjoying the video, please like and subscribe because it helps the channel out. And if you have the means and are feeling a little extra generous, you could even become a channel member for just a few dollars a month. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. As I mentioned, finding critics whose opinion you trust is, as the video title suggests, their value. I better not have to rename this video. But doing so takes a lot of work because you really do need to get a sense of their taste on a wider scale. Let's use Roger Ebert as an example. For a lot of people he was, and honestly still is, the symbol of what a film critic is. A big part of that is because of his TV shows, giving people all over access to his views on film, not just the ones who could get their hands on his writing in the Chicago Sun-Times. Ebert was one of the best at expressing his views and passion for film in a clear and accessible way, letting even the more inexperienced moviegoers understand what he does or doesn't think makes a film work. But that doesn't mean he was totemic either. His reviews of early Tim Burton films were not really as positive as the mass appeal and financial success that they had. And his one-star review of Blue Velvet is notorious for his interpretation of Lynch's worldview and use of tonal dissonance in the film as being much more of a negative than how it is regarded now. I bring this up to say you need to know the critics whose opinions you are reading. If I were reading Ebert's review of Edward Scissorhands in 1990, I would be much more interested in going to see it, despite the review being more negative, knowing he gave similar ones to Batman and Beetlejuice, movies I really enjoy. In the same vein, I think film critic Armand White writing positively about a film would scare me off. He's a big backer of Clint Eastwood and Zack Snyder, two directors who do not do it for me more often than not, and more importantly has been very critical of movies I love, like There Will Be Blood, Get Out, and Parasite. He has also posited that Miles Morales in the beloved Spider-Verse movies is a bad example of a black superhero, a great reminder that film critics are not a monolith. You really do need to put the work in reading the positive and negative reviews a critic has written about the films that you love to see how your tastes align and to figure out if they are the one you want to be paying attention to when it comes to the picking of what movie you want to see. I also think it is great to read negative reviews of the movies you love by writers whose writing you think is good because it can help reshape your view on it. Not that I think you should dictate your tastes on what other people say, but to help contextualize opposing points of view. I think this is a valuable skill to have when consuming art of any kind, and the writing of critics is a valuable tool in that. I think that's the point I'm really trying to make here, is that as a fan of films, the writings of critics is a tool available to us, and not some be-all and end-all. And if you do not enjoy the way critics you have seen write, you can always find ones that do, because the internet makes it so much easier to find all of that. And this is your quick reminder that there is no such thing as fully objective criticism. I personally think that the people who claim they are purely objective are the same people who viewed their experiences in life as universal, and that is just incorrect. We all view the art we consume, be it film or otherwise, through the lens of our existence, and trying to ignore that is a mistake. I'm not saying that critics should write reviews as the protagonist of them, but being able to link yourself to your critique can help add color and a deeper level of understanding to it. Look at my two examples from before. Ebert often included personal anecdotes in his writing, something that can help the reader understand what he is saying at a deeper level. Then you have Armand White, a critic with a very contrarian view compared to his peers. White is a conservative gay and black man, and that is very different background from most of the other critics working at his level and in his age group. That would also explain why someone like me wouldn't resonate with his work, because my lived experience is nothing like his. Who the critic is important, because even if they don't present their work as subjective, deep down, to some level it is. It can't not be. Lastly, I just want to bring up a small think piece written by Kaylee Donaldson in 2019 called Why Does Everyone Hate Critics All of a Sudden? It contextualizes anti-critic mentality and how it ties to YouTube and worse, anti-intellectualism better and more succinctly than I could have, so I'm going to leave that in the video description because I think it is a valuable resource to anyone who has gotten this far into the video. I will add something that isn't in the article though, that I think that the very evident rise in anti-intellectualism that has been coming up in the past few years is unsurprisingly somehow linked to the definite rise in conservatism in every country, not just the US, here in Canada as well. There was just recently big elections in other countries in Europe and in the UK, and it is really frightening to see all of that. And I'm not trying to posit myself as some lofty intellectual better than others, and I don't think that most film critics are doing that either. I'm just saying that we do need to challenge our worldviews and really learn what's going on, not just what is being told to us. Anyways, end of video. Thank you so much for watching. This video feels to me so much like a companion piece to the media literacy video I put out earlier this year, so if you haven't seen that, I recommend checking it out. Leave your favorite film critics in the comments, and if I am not familiar with them, I will check them out. And until next time, have a good one.